Hello and welcome to the Bulletin with UBS on Monocle Radio. Each week, the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in finance take you beyond the numbers and hype, right to the heart of the big issues of the day. In this episode of the programme, and over the following two editions, we're going to be considering the meaning of craft in today's world. It's not just about what you do, but also how you go about doing it. It's a universal set of values, perhaps, including attention to detail, a hands-on approach, and a determination to deliver the highest quality product possible. These core principles are the same no matter your métier, from the world of banking, via bespoke furniture, to the robotics innovations of tomorrow. Craft's the ability to gaze both backwards and forwards, to recognise heritage and skill, and combine it with a compelling vision. In this series, Monocle and UBS are interrogating how these tenets come to life across different industries and explaining why craft matters, or why it should, whatever your discipline. In the next couple of programmes, we'll hear from various crafts people working across disciplines from design to automotive to tailoring to learn more about their approach. But we start our series and today's programme with why UBS as a bank considers its work craft. What are the values and the principles that underscore this approach and, well, why does it matter? Here to talk to us about that is Paul Donovan, the ever-erudite Chief Economist of UBS Global Wealth Management. Paul, great to chat with you about this, and I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit about this idea of banking as craft, and listeners to Monocle, readers of the magazine indeed, and people just walking in the world will have seen these communications from the bank. Give me a little bit of a sense from, as you see it, why the bank, why it's important for the bank to consider what it does as craft, and I guess then you and your colleagues as craftsmen and women.
Well, I think when we think in a very, very theoretical way in the world of economics, a job is simply a collection of tasks. But actually, in the real world, it's not. I mean, we spend most of our waking hours in our jobs. The culture in which we work is extremely important. And I think that if you are doing a job effectively, it's not just a series of tasks. It's something that you are passionate about. It's something that you actually enjoy doing. And that, I think, is what distinguishes a job from a craft. And so banking, I think, very much is a craft. It's a very intensive industry, always has been. But it's something where I think you have to bring a degree of enthusiasm, a degree of excitement about what it is you're doing in order to be able to achieve the best results. And that's why, at UBS, it's very much regarded as a craft. And it's why everyone from senior management downwards spends so much time focusing on the culture of what we do, and not just what appears on the balance sheet, but everything that goes around that gives value added to clients at the end of the day.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting you use that idea of value, that word value, Paul. Is it about having a different understanding of the values that then underpin the day-to-day? Is it about overlaying whatever your particular skill set is, in your case as an economist, but making sure that that's informed by these broader principles that are beyond your personal instincts or your professional training? I don't know, is it a challenge in terms of integrating those, the mechanics of doing the job day to day, or is it just about always having those values and principles either back of or front of mind?
Well, I think you have to bring a set of values, a set of ideas to the workplace, and it goes beyond the formulaic approach to a job. So, in the world of economics, there has been a lot of focus in recent years, led by Robert Shiller, the Nobel laureate, on narrative economics. It's not enough in this day and age to be a good economist. You can be the best economist out there, but people are not going to listen to you. So we need to not only be good at economics, but we need to be able to communicate, to tell a story that is accessible to our clients. So in my work, I often use the phrase economics without jargon, because the economics profession has been terrible at jargon. But we've got to be able to communicate that, and actually communicating with personal experience, communicating with emotional resonance is actually what's going to get the idea across, what's going to make the idea stick with the people you're talking about. And if I can convince our clients of my viewpoint. Hopefully that will lead to better decision making. Hopefully it will lead to better informed decision making. At least I would hope so. And so that's part of this process. It's not just being a very good mathematical economist on paper. In fact, it's way more than that we need to bring to it. And that's the personal experiences, the personal enthusiasm, the understanding of the subtle nuances of the client. The fact that the presentation I give in Singapore will not be exactly the same as a presentation I give in New York or in London or in Zurich, because you have to adapt to local client needs, local client cultures and understanding all of the time. So it's this sort of mix of things that we have to bring together, and that really is what is a craft. I mean, otherwise, it is just sort of something almost robotic. We can't be robots in banking.
Oh, absolutely. And I just wondered, to that point then, Paul, how difficult is it? Because we often have conversations about the challenge of, I can't think of an example, maybe pricing in, say, political volatility into decision-making. Very, very difficult to do. Can you, or should you, maybe you shouldn't even try and do this, so price in what these extra values mean, how to kind of use them as frames of reference? Because, as you keep saying, it's about humanity, it's about understanding, it's about nuance. I don't know, there don't seem to be obvious economic formulas or scientific formulas for these things. So many of them are just on instinct. Is it difficult to do that? Or actually is getting good at doing that, as tough as it is, why UBS is so effective at what it does?
Well, I think it is difficult. Absolutely, it's difficult to do this. And I think what we have to do, and what I think UBS is very good at doing, is to present the story about what is going on so that people can understand, particularly around, for example, something like political risk. But then also what we need to make clear is an understanding of the risks around that, the scenarios around that. The world does not deal in absolutes. And so we have to say, well, this is the central case and these are the risk cases and this was what could move us in this direction or that direction. And not sort of pound the table and say, this is my view, end of discussion, because that's not going to get you anywhere. So adding that nuance, adding that subtlety, and doing it in a way that people from different cultural backgrounds, different base levels of knowledge can understand. I mean, I always say that domestic investors always understand their politics better than foreign investors do. That's inevitable. But we have to communicate to our foreign investor base what is going on with the domestic politics and make sure that they do understand the subtleties around different cultures and what this means, and that your frame of reference is not necessarily the right one to apply here, so how can we explain that? I mean, this is all part of what we have to do. And it requires, I think, a level of understanding of the subject matter, but also a level of understanding of the audience. And that combination is really, really important to make sure that everybody gets the best understanding that they can of where we are in the world. And that's what I think of a diverse and inclusive organisation like UBS, with its focus on clear cultural objectives, on things like challenging constructively, of course, and coming up with critical thinking. That's really, really important. And what we end up doing, of course, is part of our mission, is connecting different people around the world and improving their understanding of different environments.
Yeah, such powerful work. Just a final thought, Paul. I often ask you this, in terms of people who are listening and this resonates, and I guess, Monocle speaks to this idea about doing things maybe a bit slower, taking time, thinking about the craft of day-to-day detail, quotidian detail that perhaps you might otherwise overlook. What's the best way to do that, whether you're speaking as an economist, as a senior colleague within UBS, or just generally? We've spoken about your appreciation for fine art and contemporary art before, of course. How should people, just in their day-to-day, I don't know, how can people make sure that they're thinking about what they do more thoughtfully and applying some of these principles about craft and consideration to the day-to-day? Any fixes? I guess just maybe taking a second sometimes, right? Slowing down a little bit?
I think that can help. I mean, we're in the world of hashtag economics and sound bites and everything's got to be tweetable and all the rest of it. And yes, I understand that. And sometimes a fast reaction is required. But actually, with a lot of the more complex issues that we're facing now, there's a lot to be said for just pausing and thinking a little about things. And just challenging some of the underlying assumptions. That's something I think which doesn't happen nearly enough, to go out and say, well, actually, you're telling me this with sort of absolute authority, but is it really? And does that really stack up against this, this, and this? And making comparisons can be really useful. So I think that taking time to challenge, to try and think about something from a different perspective is actually really, really useful in this environment. And I think, I don't really like the phrase thinking outside the box, but I think having other experiences in life that sometimes quite by accident, as it were, sort of relate to what is going on, that can also be, I think, very, very helpful. Where, whether it's through history or through art or through charitable work or whatever it is, there is some other aspect of your work, of your life, which you don't necessarily think is related to your day job, but you'll be surprised how often there are little points of connections or similarity and so on. And sort of bringing that very big picture view into the workplace is very, very powerful, I think.
Paul Donovan. So how does Monocle approach the story of craft? And why have benchmarks of excellence in this realm remained of such enduring fascination to Monocle's editors and our readers and listeners? Well, here to hopefully answer that question is the magazine's editor, Josh Fehnert. Hello, Josh. Let's talk a little bit about why we have, I guess, some shared values with UBS. They're talking about their banking as a craft, the importance of bringing a human approach, even something that's very intense, very numbers focused. And that speaks to some of Monocle's values, enduring values, the importance of doing things properly. Is that a fair summation of what craft means to Monocle's editors?
It's a very generous summation because I'd like to say that we always have the level of time and expertise that we portray on page to get things done. But actually, the news business is by its very nature about novelty. And that's why when we publish a magazine, we need to do something at some remove from that novelty because it takes time to print things properly on paper. It takes time to source great access, to get good stories. And it does take time to edit copy so we're reflective of what's going on in the world. So yes, about the shared values, probably no about the forensic detail that goes into every single aspect of what we do, because actually journalism also needs to be in the moment. And that's what craft is, I believe, at its best. It's taking time to do something, but also having the muscle memory, having the skill, having the experience, having the insight, and sometimes following your gut in the same way that a great glassmaker might just know when the thing's about to break or how far they can push their material. There's this interesting dimension, I believe, to craft, which isn't just about doing things over and over again and getting good at them. It's actually about going with the curve, going with the temperature, going with the moment and having the experience to push things a little bit. And the magazine is a great place to do that. I should also maybe qualify when we're talking about craft. We do take a rather broad view. I remember when we published our very first book, The Monocle Guide to Better Living. On the very first page of that book is a cityscape of Sao Paulo, and on the very last page is a cup of coffee in the Monocle Cafe. And it might seem trite, but really those are the things that we're interested in, and they both feed into craft. Where you get the beans, how you make the cup, how you warm it, the environment it's served in. It's very easy to see how a coffee cup can be crafted or quote-unquote crafted. But a city's the same. The same consideration needs to go into the boring stuff, the zoning, the permits, how clean the air is, how the buildings are built, how the neighbourhood comes together, how the shops are stocked, and also even the training of the people in the shops. So when we talk about craft, we are talking about this quite expansive view, I believe in the same way that Paul and the UBS team are.
Well, let's talk a bit about sector specifics, because I guess that's our journalistic approach, and almost from a kind of philosophical point of view, but we also see the value in making things with your hands, making things in cities. You mentioned great neighbourhoods often have makers and doers in them. I guess on a more quotidian and detailed level, there is something to be said for that interest in process, small detail. Again, I guess that is about taking time, but the idea of just doing things simply, manually, making things, we also recognise the importance of that, particularly if we look at the fabric of our cities, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and it's more important than ever, really, isn't it? Because, I suppose technology does promise us quicker access to more things, and there's been a bifurcation of interest. Yeah, I mean, of course, I can skim 100 emails very quickly, but that might make my time reading a novel for pleasure and reading it on paper even more important to me. And we see that, and an example that I often quote sometimes when we speak to advertisers or marketeers, is that, we live in this two-speed world. The same person who's, yammering on about how slow the Wi-Fi is in a cafe might be waiting 5 minutes for a drip coffee. So they do value the time taken to do something, and they value their leisure time, and they will spend probably more money than a cup of brown water might have been worth to a previous generation. But because that appreciation of craft comes in fits and bursts, and let's be very clear, if you're talking about your finances, your future, your investments, you really want someone that sweated the detail on that. But, in terms of retail and consumers, I think we are seeing an incredible shift towards people understanding that generations of people in a certain valley in Japan who've made pottery in the same manner for hundreds and hundreds of years, family-owned businesses in the same way, and city neighbourhoods that have survived the falling bombs of wars and been subject to the hand of a craftsman or the hand of an architect or the hand of a great urban planner. Things with a human fingerprint have an emotional resonance. They can also have a benefit, as I described there, and if people are managing your finances or watching the markets very carefully, the human touch is also something that's important to craft. And I don't think that's exclusive of new technology that enables human beings to make better decisions or to disseminate information more easily. Just to give you another example, you could craft a story that someone ends up reading on their phone. You could craft a story that ends up being read online. It's not that these two things can't coexist. I think when we think about craft, we just think about the experience of doing it, the muscle memory, the repetition that gives you expertise in something and then allows you to go beyond. Because actually, when we think about craft, we're not always thinking about easily replicable things, because sometimes that could be done without a craftsman. It's sometimes the fact that the craftsman's done it before and even done it a little bit differently. And certainly when we look at the craft of journalism, I don't want to read an identikit beginning to every story. I don't want to read the same headlines over and over again. I kind of want to be taken on a journey and taken somewhere, and that's something else craft can do.
And Josh, just finally, and I don't want to put you on the spot as the sole kind of arbiter of this, but as the editor of Monocle, we're often asked about benchmarks of excellence, particularly in the context of quality of life, and this idea about valuing craft and doing things for the right reasons, which you've already described. It does mean people tend to come to us. If a listener was to say, well, listen, Mr. Fehnert, you talk a good game. What does this actually look like? What should I do in my day-to-day in order to try and immerse myself in these values or experience them in a way that I haven't before? What's an easy way to do that? I'm a very busy man or woman. I've only got a little bit of time. Where do I start? Is it as easy as looking at the world differently, going somewhere different?
It could be anything, can't it? I mean, sometimes it involves putting your phone away, to be honest. And, that slick black puck of plastic feels the same whatever you're reading and conveys a similar amount of information. But to be honest, it conveys information in a way where you often see the clock on it, you often see the notifications on it, and sometimes an appreciation of craft or what's around us or texture or tactility starts where you put that phone away and put your hand on something. Our former design editor, Hugo MacDonald, many years ago, late of this parish, wrote a book about how to enjoy cities. And one of the things that always stuck with me is he said you've got to feel the city. He talks about putting his hand on old buildings. He talks about front doors. He talks about the things that you touch and feel. And actually, whether you're a hotelier, scanning your property for small defects before it opens, whether you're opening a cafe, whether you're an entrepreneur on a small or large scale, tactility and touch points are super important, because even as we thrust headlong into what technology can do for us and the way that it can treat information, actually, our hardware is a little bit older. We're 250,000 years old, and we need to see things, smell things, hear things, touch things. So a touch point for craft might be a subscription to Monocle magazine. Clearly I'm biased, but feeling things on paper, knowing that it was printed in Europe to the highest possible standard, knowing that the journalism in there has been pored over by experienced editors and foreign correspondents, is, I think, a way of indulging in craft in the same way as buying a lacquered bowl that you've heard a good story about. I think it's about experiencing these things. So wherever you are in the world, there's a possibility. And you know what? Some cities do it way, way better than others. If you find yourself in, let's say, Porto, there is a tangible sense that, in the heartland, just beyond that city, there are people still making luxury goods, they're still making clothes, and you're still close to the means of production. So in a globalized world where there are so many opportunities to get things cheaper, there is this interesting shift, which is shown in markets, is shown in where and how people spend their disposable income, towards knowing and caring where and how things are made, and following that thread from the person's intent. Is it great branding? Is it a great customer experience? through to the product and knowing that something's, say, made in France or made in the UK, one of the rare things that probably still is. That still matters and the story still matters. So the craft of storytelling is, in many ways, sometimes as important as the craft of making things.
Monocle's editor, Josh Fehnert. But it is to that craft of making things that we'll turn as our special series exploring the meaning of craft continues in next week's edition.
What I'm doing is not art. I'm designing, and two overlap, but what art for me is still today and remains is an incredible frame of reference for true, pure, unfiltered, uncompromised creativity.
Find out who that is describing their craft at the same time next week. We'll bring you more like that as UBS and Monocle continue this interrogation of craft and why it's not just about what you do, but how you go about doing it. That's the end, though, of this edition of the programme. Listen again and explore more at monocle.com. And don't forget, you can discover more and find out how UBS can help you by heading over to ubs.com. I'm Tom Edwards. Thanks for listening.